Hello, welcome to another weekly episode of Bingley Talks Politics. It's myself, Mr. Booth. To my left, I have Finn.
Hello.
And as ever, the erstwhile Mr. Cook is here.
Hello.
And today's topic is Britain after Brexit. And this is a very wide-ranging topic. I don't know whether some people might be sick of Brexit, but we're talking about its impact, really, aren't we? And how it's affected the country. Where do we go next? What's happening now? And on that, why is it important now? So I suppose the first question is, why are people still talking about Brexit? Why does it still crop up? Finn?
Well, I mean, it's incredibly important, isn't it? So for the past 6 years, it is.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a very big issue. It's sort of come out of the headlines in the past couple of years when Boris Johnson seems to have gotten Brexit done.
Get Brexit done. Yes, we had the mantra. Is it mantra? Yeah.
But yeah, it's still important because it affects our everyday lives. You know, we've had massive changes in rights, freedom of movement that's been taken away. Businesses, they're adapting to the new trade regulations. You've got potential problems in Northern Ireland to do with like bordering the Irish Sea. Might be some new elections there because of that.
So it's quite wide-ranging, isn't it? There's several things to unpick. We'll maybe focus on a couple of them today. It's cropped up, hasn't it? Well, it was in the news this week. Keir Starmer, leader of the opposition, leader of the Labour Party, talking about immigration and Britain weaning itself off low-paid, cheap migrant workers, still accepting higher-skilled immigrants coming into the country to fulfil shortages. And he was talking to businesses, wasn't he? And obviously it's a move as part of a long build-up to the next general election for the Labour Party as well, I would have thought. But the issue of immigration was clearly important in the Brexit referendum. It's important to quite a few people. My hunch is it's changed a little bit. The general views changed a little bit on this. So what impact is Brexit having right now on our economy? Mr. Cook, what's your take on that?
Well, at the moment, the two interrelated issues when it comes to the economy, the biggest one at the moment might be the way it's impacting Ireland, right, with the cross-border trade. So Boris signed this deal that Theresa May wouldn't contemplate, which was this supposed, lack of a better term, a hard border down the Irish Sea, right, is what people keep saying. You have customs checks running in and out because of the Good Friday Agreement and the sensitivities and complexities around the invisible border, right, with the lack of checkpoints and border posts and stuff. And it's kind of, Boris hasn't really got it done. He kind of left it unfinished, it seems. There's a lot of tensions around that. There's lots of issues with certain produce being developed and made in Britain, not being able to get into Ireland, and vice versa. A lot of products that should be going to Northern Ireland not getting down there.
Instalments ground to a halt, largely because of it, hasn't it, really? So,
I mean, because he refuses, Jeffrey Donaldson refuses to serve in any kind of government until there's any sort of revision. In fact, but less more in the hard border favour for Jeffrey Donaldson. His argument is that he doesn't want this to be cut off from, lack of a better term, cut off from the rest of the UK. And then you've got Sinn Féin, which is obviously saying, well, it might be simpler if we just joined the single market or something like that, and it will resolve most of the tension.
So the debate's not really finished, has it? Certainly in Northern
really.
Ireland, and I think this is something that I think some people get quite cross and angry about, because there was a lot of work in Northern Ireland. We don't need to go. We haven't got time to do even a brief history of recent issues in Northern Ireland and political history there. But a lot of work went in to improving the situation, the peace agreements, the Good Friday Agreement we've mentioned already today. And there's an awful lot of detail that goes into these things. And I think Brexit has thrown up this interesting contrast between, yes, obviously politics, elections, voting, when it goes into the general public, tends to get boiled down to sometimes these phrases, these pithy one-liners, the simplicity of it, and that's needed to a degree, but the devil's in the detail really sometimes, and Brexit's a great example of this, where really you do need to be understanding the detail with some of these things, because it matters. And Finn mentioned it does affect people's lives, and I think people in Northern Ireland don't want it necessarily to have the impact, but it is having an impact, and they may be worried about the future, getting it sorted out. There seems to have been a lack of progress on it as well. Just reached an impasse where, I mean, we're no nearer a solution to this, how it seems, and no one's really talking about it in a huge way.
I mean, this is
prioritising it.
Yeah, it's a sad thing with. I mean, you've seen it throughout numerous governments that since the Good Friday Agreement, Ireland has become almost a peripheral issue in British politics, and a lot of English people, even though you look at the details, what's going on there, due to the Brexit deal that Boris made, it's quite bad. It's quite significantly bad, but because it's in the minds of a lot of English people, it's so far away, and it's an issue that's quite historical and is supposedly resolved now. The government's not giving it the attention it should. There should be a man surely on this, or woman on this task, day and night, driving compromise, driving negotiation between the two sides. But it's just not there, is it? Like,
so where that will lead is, well, it could lead to in a variety of places. Some of them don't look that great, really, and we're no closer to solving that than we were a few months ago, than over a year ago, whatever, really. Yeah. Just while we're on the different parts of the United Kingdom, then, let's just jump over to Scotland from Northern Ireland. And the courts are deciding today, we recorded this on Wednesday, the courts are deciding on whether, Supreme Court, on whether Scotland can hold another referendum. They're looking at the detail as to be quite a big constitutional decision. So Scotland thinks different things to England, doesn't it, on Brexit? So Scotland voted in favour of remaining in the European Union. Where do we see this one heading?
Well, in terms of the Supreme Court decision, I think probably Scotland won't be allowed to have a referendum because it's not...
Yeah, that's probably... Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite clear that the Constitution says no, the Scottish Government doesn't have the power to call a referendum, but they're trying anyway. So what Nicola Sturgeon will say there is that the next general elections, you'll say that's kind of a de facto referendum on whether or not Scotland should be in the Union. Independence and sentiment for independence has grown recently since 2014, when the original independence referendum was, because originally Nicola Sturgeon said Scotland can be independent but still be within the EU, and one of the arguments in 2014 was that the EU wouldn't let Scotland in because it's leaving the UK and therefore like all the complexities of it. But now the UK's left the EU, it's a completely different scenario, and the SNP are arguing it's better for Scotland to be inside the EU and outside of the UK, which doesn't really make sense because you think, you know, the whole thing of better together doesn't quite make sense. It's contradictory. But you look at the example of Northern Ireland is actually quite good. I mean, whilst it doesn't have a functioning parliament or a functioning executive, its economy, because it's still inside the single market, is growing more than the rest of the UK. You know, industry in Northern Ireland is doing.
Yeah, so there was something on the... I mean, it's an interesting one. So I heard yesterday, I think, on the news that the UK, I think it was a forecast out of the leading European countries, has the worst economic outlook. I would imagine people who are pro-Brexit, either were or still are quite strongly pro-Brexit, will say you can't blame all of that on Brexit. But then I read other things, that trade is down, that businesses that, you know, we relied on the EU for a high percentage, particularly with small businesses actually, with trade. And it's interesting, wasn't it? Because at the time, the Remain campaign was labelled Project Fear. And I think it was perhaps a mistake in the way that Cameron and the team who were leading the campaign to remain in the Union did perhaps use some of the arguments, and it did appear negative, and maybe they downplayed they didn't really promote a more positive vision of staying in the European Union. But if we just take the potential things they were talking about, I think some people on the other side, on the Leave campaign, when the economy didn't have a huge impact in the first few months after leaving Brexit, said, well, yeah, it's what we, told you it's Project Fear. It's fine. There was some turbulence in the financial markets and so forth, but it settled down, it's fine. But I think the way I always sort of saw it is like, well, I think surely it will be the longer term investment and companies either wanting to come in and either establish themselves in the UK or use the UK and the longer term picture. And there are quite a lot of commentators now saying that that's not looking fantastic, which I think is quite concerning for the UK.
I think on the economy, I think you made, when you said then, for instance, that did you say Northern Ireland or Ireland was going quicker? It was interesting when you remember the whole, I think it was late last year, this year I think, but do you remember the truckers shortage? The HGV.
Yes, yeah.
If you looked actually on a map of Europe at where people were being most affected by the shortage of truckers, basically HGV drivers, Ireland was actually kind of okay. Northern Ireland was struggling. Northern Ireland was doing fine as well, sorry. It was actually everything behind the hard border in the Irish Sea, i.e. mainland Britain, that was struggling with it. Northern Ireland was fine. So I think this is the biggest issue with the economic aspect of Brexit, right? I think one of the most significant areas we're seeing it is in the migrant labour shortages. You're seeing it in the healthcare system now, and this was, this was like a positive, right, in the campaign. Oh, we get less low-skilled labour. Well, we're seeing the knock-on effects of that now in very unpredictable ways. No one really in the Brexit camp planned ahead and thought, right, of all these occupations, which ones should we expect to have shortages for and plan ahead? No one did that, right? Because a lot of them were quite right-wing, free market, lack of state intervention, lack of state planning, leave it all to kind of, the chaos will sort it out over time, right?
Yeah, it's there does seem to be perhaps a lack of strategic planning with a lot of these things. I heard, well, I think it was Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was clearly a leading Brexiteer, until recently a member of the government. He appealed to, I think it was through the Sun newspaper and maybe other newspapers, of wanting like 1,000 ways we were better off outside the EU, to try and perhaps inject some energy and positivity to that side of the argument. I think they got up to about 9. One of the best points, and one of my other Year 12 politics students was quite vehement. This is a really strong point. It's all to do with hairdryer power. Wow. Your hairdryers now, and this is important, people out there, you can get more. I suppose Christmas coming up, you can buy a really powerful hairdryer, and that's quite important.
Worth it.
I'm not an expert really on the power of hairdryers. I mean, it's a part of my life that perhaps I've overlooked. So, but yeah, you can now, regulations were freed up to have more powerful hairdryers. Perhaps that will go to vacuum cleaners as well. I don't know. It could be.
Take back control.
Yeah, that could be something. And clearly, there's people who will say that's a good thing. I don't know whether that outweighs lack of investment by huge companies in going forward in the next 5 years. I'm not sure about that. So everyone can draw their own conclusion, can't they, on what's going on. I do think something that sort of puzzles me is was it worth it then? Was it worth the things that the Leave campaign were saying for now what looks a relatively gloomy economic picture, which, okay, I suggest has been at least partly contributed to by leaving the European Union? Was it worth it?
I think I'll play devil's advocate here. I'll play the Brexit side. They'd probably argue it's going to be a decade plus long process. I mean, my friends that are Brexiteers, they always frame it in terms of a 50-year timescale almost, and they've got all these kind of checkpoints, I guess you could say, throughout where they're going to expect the growth will pick up. And
50 years then?
Well, it's more like their argument is it's a gradual kind of, so the investment, you'll see a drop in investment at the beginning, and then the market process will bring in different investments, so you'll have different places, and trade will jig itself out slowly over the course of like half a century maybe. And then by the end of it, everything will be back to normal again, everything will be flowing. I think in terms of...
It's a bit loose, that argument.
It's a bit loose.
Yeah.
I think the clear... I mean, there's no other way to put it. The chaos that's come about just through a lack of any foresight on anyone's part in power. And arguably the muddling process that went on for a while. So you had Theresa May obviously right, and it was kind of just in stasis for a few years. Nothing really happened. There was negotiations, and obviously that knocked confidence in Britain because you had this long delay process going on. And then, I mean, I looked at this recently so this is before Brexit even officially took place. We're talking the last quarter of 2019. The British economy flatlined. There was no growth. It was 0%. So it didn't collapse, and there wasn't this huge deflation move, but you did have no growth in the last quarter of 2019 while Boris is Prime Minister. So in a material sense, is it worth it? Well, no. I think that's fairly... Materially speaking, we are now, and for whatever reason, right, because I'm not going to pretend that it's just Brexit. You've got the Ukraine war, you've got rampant inflation across the globe, you've got a strong dollar, but...
Then on the Ukraine war, you could argue Germany are more affected by it, but their economic outlook...
Yeah, it's we've got the highest inflation
far more
rate.
Positive than ours.
Yeah, we have the highest inflation. We have a really abnormally high inflation rate, actually, for the G7. If you look at Germany, they have inflation, but they don't have it at, like, 10%, like in Britain. So yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
I think it's also, we've talked about this with Liz Truss. I think Brexit is one of those things, it just removes the credibility of the UK as a nation. When you look abroad and you look at foreign newspapers, I don't quite know who mentioned this, but, how foreign people... I think it's Julia Gillard, actually, how she said on Restless Politics, how the others...
The number 2 political podcast in the country. How they deceive us.
Just a bit silly, really. Why would you do that? Because it's widely recognised that the EU makes economic sense. It is, yes, I suppose from a left-wing point of view, you could say it's all about big business, but having open trade, open borders, being able to cross from one border to another, and you know nothing but just the road signs change. It's better for trade, it's better for our economies, it's better for people. You can go to university wherever you want in the EU. It makes economic sense, it makes lives better for everyone on both sides.
So we've done the economy, we think there's a few question marks potentially, but as you say, Mr. Cook, there could be some things that Brexit releases into the economy that are positive. It would need, I would suggest, then politicians, political leaders, as well as business leaders, to grasp that. I assume that's what Keir Starmer is trying to do. The Labour Party are clearly not wanting to be tarnished with any kind of Remain sympathy. We've moved on, and he wants to take that into the next election. Is Brexit still an issue in the next election?
I mean, probably not. I mean, the issues that the word Brexit itself encompassed. So, I mean, we can break Brexit down, can't we? I mean, vote leave, a lot of it was immigration, a lot of it was trade, I guess, even that played a little bit sovereignty, all these concepts. Those as issues might still be there. I think immigration, I mean, people like Dominic Cummings and Boris and Gove argued, well, Brexit done and immigration disappears as an issue. Well, that's not happened, has it? That's really not happened at the moment. And is that partly because politicians aren't handling it well as an issue rather than, shaping public perceptions? Probably. That might be a big event, but Brexit in itself, I really hope not.
Yeah, I think probably people are tired of it. Well, it's happened, hasn't it? So in the sense of it, the ground has changed in the 2019 election. My sense is that I think for everyone's benefit, we're best to move on, and whether you are in favour of Brexit or not, to actually deal with it's that phrase making the best of it, isn't it? At least for a certain time. Whether there's could be a movement to go back into the European Union in a few years' time, I don't know, possibly. But for the foreseeable future, it will be that. So I hope, therefore, that it would be probably good for the political health of the nation, if you like, to have. And the cost of living crisis and the economy is probably going to be the number one issue. All right, so let's just done the economy, done a bit of politics there. What about socially? So Has it changed us as a people? I thought George Osborne, former Chancellor, then was editor of the Evening Standard. Does he still do that? I don't know.
He's now an advisor in the government again.
Well, Jeremy Hunt, actually, I read that, Jeremy Hunt called on him, didn't he? Happens a lot that we, often don't realise. Anyway, George Osborne, former Chancellor, was Chancellor of the Exchequer, probably the second most powerful politician at the time, after Cameron, when the referendum was arranged. He said not to do it, and he said it releases forces you can't control. Once you've done it, you can't control. So it's those forces in society, which I think actually played. I think he was spot on with his prediction, because I did think it did release a lot of forces. Has it changed us? How about that for a question? Has the Brexit process, or the referendum, just after the referendum, the debates and issues and topics that it threw up, are we now different in this country? What do you think to that as an idea thing?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the whole sort of fundamental thing of Brexit is that we're looking back to the 1970s. I mean, I don't know why you think the 1970s were good, but we were saying
I was born then. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
You should know then. Looking back to the 1970s and saying things were better then, it was good in the old days before we had the EU. And I think fundamentally we stopped looking outwards and we began to look inwards. And I don't think we've started to look outwards yet again. There was this whole rhetoric around global Britain, but fundamentally we were closing off our borders to our closest neighbours. I know, Boris Johnson said, we can start trading with Australia more, but, France is 20 miles away, Australia is 3,000 miles away.
I think I read also the other day, very quickly, that one of the Tory minister who was part of we got a trade deal with Australia, didn't we? I think we did anyway, but then they said it wasn't very good. So, it just seems to be a procession of problems. We talked about Northern Ireland a few minutes ago, didn't we? And then there's... So, the idea that we would then create... Well, you heard people like Ian Duncan Smith. I mean, he did... I remember this interview with Ian Duncan Smith, former leader of the Conservative Party, then a minister, quite a good minister in a way, quite outspoken, and seemed to have, be sticking to sort of certain principles, was welfare and pensions for a while. But anyway, talking about Brexit, very excited he was Ian Duncan Smith. And I remember watching his interview, and he made his comments quite a lot, that he wanted to be a buccaneer and be able to, if only I was 30 years younger, this spirit, I would be able to move around the world. It almost like, sort of 18th, 19th century empire stuff here. And I was like, okay, I might be missing something here, but I think the world has moved on and it's different now and you won't be able to do it. And that just seemed really obvious to me. But I don't think that was a reason people voted Brexit. But it formed part of the whole thing. Look, and plays to what you were talking about, Finn. It was better decades ago. Life was better. I'm not going to bang the drum. Anyone who knows me and anyone who talks to me about this, it doesn't take me long to get... I'm a real anti-nostalgist. I mean, I could talk about this for a long time. The good old, bad old days, really. Yeah. For one reason why it was better in the past, I can usually quote a 5 immediately that it wasn't, and that's a real problem to me. But again, we've got limited time, so we've made us more insular. You said, Finn, So we look too inward, and that doesn't sound a good thing, really, is it? Perhaps
no, it isn't.
For us, just as people, So is it good in our lives to look backward? I don't think so. Yeah, Finn, you don't think so either, do you, really? What else, Mr. Cook, is it? What other impacts has it had, do you think, on our society? Can you point to anything else?
I mean, my biggest fear was that we were going to see a more polarised, and when I say polarised, I don't necessarily dislike... I relish, ideological clashes, right? So I don't necessarily dislike a polarised politics. It's a rude, vitriolic, hateful, kind of personalised politics, like you see in America. And I think Britain is very, very prone to catching stuff that America sets off on, basically. I think culturally we are very prone to that. I mean, consumerism, things like that's increased. That was my biggest fear. Luckily, people kind of seem to have come back together again. At the very least, they haven't like agreed, yeah, you were completely right and you were completely correct, and this person. But at the very least, they're starting to recognise each other as humans again, as people.
Yeah, I think the next 3, 5, 10 years will be a big factor in that, because I thought you hit on some really interesting themes there, because. Yeah, but I think those of us that are interested in politics and social issues and things like that, we like debate. We understand people can't think the same thing. We're not fascists, people, and we want debate, don't we? But this is the tension here, and this is how I explain populism to people, and it's about pluralism. In a pluralist country, in a pluralist political system, you have that debate, and you are respectful. You understand that that's crucial for the health of the political system. What a populist system does is it denies that, it creates conflict, and it tries to assert that its breed of ideas is the best, and it's like a superior, inferior thing rather than a clash of different ideas. And also that plays into the culture wars and some differences, some sort of like ethnic clashes, and it's turned into a sort of ethnic debate, and that can get quite problematic and I think we did go down that route. I'm not saying Brexit was to blame for an increase in racism, but I think they were recording more racist incidents. There may be something in that, and there was more of a willingness to say things, which is a big problem, to say particular things that could be offensive to others. And I wonder if Brexit just encouraged that ground for that. I don't think many people don't think that's a good idea. Some people might like it.
I think that's what Osborne was getting at, basically.
I think he was, yeah.
He's saying like the people running the campaign might not have bad intentions. They might be a bit idiotic, some of them, a bit like like Ian Duncan Smith, a bit nostalgic, but they're not racist per se. But beware of the confidence it gives the others, right? That they come out the woodwork thinking, okay, well, here's the beacon, I'll just follow that. I've been given a green light.
Yeah, I think those forces you can't control are really interesting. And I think that's the point about referendums, particularly ones on this, and it goes back to the Northern Ireland thing, where it's quite a straightforward thing. Remain, leave, I like the EU. And then it's like, well, okay, what do you mean by that? And I thought, people who wanted to remain in the EU, it defined by a whole host of reasons for it, a whole different sort of reasons, and sort of similar on the leave side, whole host of different reasons. But then some of them got a bit of a life of their own, and some of the issues that were promoted as part of the campaign became quite negative and have sort of fed into our politics a bit too much. So I think we still, back to our topic, how has it affected Britain? It clearly has, and we're clearly still on a bit of a, hate this phrase, we're on a journey, aren't we, with it. We don't quite know where that's going to lead us.
I think the cultural impact might be more significant than the economic in the end. I think over the course of, we'll see, because people like, this Australian trade deal, a lot of that was based on this idea of people like Boris and Gerber, and it's like, okay, this reorientation of Britain back to its, old Dominion days, these old ties and stuff.
The imperial tariff.
Yeah, and I think you've said before to me, like, I think China looks at that and goes, ooh, oh, Britain's back. Like,
yeah. Oh no, we didn't plan for this.
Yeah, we're going to have the China Sea. Like,
does anyone realise China now is a bit different to China then, and that might, and India perhaps.
And in
maybe,
terms of the navy relative to
ours,
like it's a power. They're just
that was an interesting thing. But look, I'll call it out. It frustrates me, this, because while there's some duplicity with certain politicians there, from various places, it's the ignorance that really frustrates me. We need to understand things better as a people, as a country. The education needs to be better, maybe the media needs to be better. There's lots of levels of this, but we need to understand things better as a country to actually get at least closer to a proper debate on this, because a lot of it was, to me, nonsense. You can't, the buccaneering spirit of, it's just nonsense.
Britannia cliche.
Exactly. It doesn't, it really is a weak argument.
Strange, isn't it? Because it's like it was trying to get at being this kind of patriotic takeover almost, wasn't it? Like in America, make America great again. But we're quite bad at being patriotic. It was kind of quite half-hearted, really, wasn't it? It was weird.
That is a really great point, Finn, because I think that half-heartedness plays both. It can be a strength and a weakness, because that's where you are allowed to think what you like in this country. However, a number of sort of English British things that we sort of rub along together, or we generally, you're right, we don't have a political and electoral system that really allows for extremist parties, but they've never been that well supported anyway. Even in a PR system, there wouldn't have been a huge, the National Front or anything like that. And I think, that's part of the fact that, when it comes back to it, actually we find a way to that, whether it's tolerance, acceptance and understanding that actually it's important for all of us that we just get along together, and Brexit seems to disrupt some of that a little bit.
I don't think it had much traction with voters, the whole Rule Britannia rule the waves. I think most voters were mainly worried about the financial implications right on their household spending. I think that was the key thing that Leave did, was that they convinced us about a third of the population that were kind of worried about leaving the EU that actually they'd be okay, and that was what won it for them. I don't think it was talking about striking trade deals around the world.
No, I think Cummings is quite talented at certain things, and I think Take Back Control was a really important. He understood this. He's a very good political strategist for particular purposes. And okay, let's sort of finish on this, because this might be something sort of a future conversation. Take Back Control clearly resonated in certain ways, but the control or the lack of control that many people felt didn't necessarily have anything directly linked to the EU. That was just a vehicle to express it. But I think that is the interesting one, because the sense of control, autonomy, freedom that people feel over their own lives, it's got to be important. And clearly it was an issue that worried people, that concerned people, and they were given an outlet to express that. So I'd be interested to see where we are with that. I don't quite know how we would measure that currently, but do people feel that they've got any more control in their lives? My guess would be no, by the way.
Yeah.
If anything, less.
I think for us it's kind of about realising that we are just a small island in the North Sea, and we're a lot more than that. But there's been a shift fundamentally over the past 30 years, and that is that the UK, we're no longer just the UK. We're part of a wider global system, and we've got to realise that it's no longer Britannia rules the waves. We're no longer the empire on which the sun never sets. We are a bit different now, and we need to make the most of what we've already got. I think that's really important. We aren't going to go back to the times of the empire.
No, and it's about moving forward, isn't it? And this is the anti-nostalgia ticket, to say, look, it's not about that, it's about this. And what I'd really love to hear is politicians talking about the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years, to say, what are the new jobs, the new technologies, the new things we can do as a country, the culture that we can create and develop, which is something I think Britain's really good at, and play to our strengths and be a successful partner. So I hope that they do that, and we move away from the sort of negativity. So there you go, that's Brexit done. Oh, there you go, brilliant, unintentional. So if you have any views, you must have on Brexit or any of the issues we've talked about, please send them in to us. And I thought we're going to do we're going to get some of the Year 10s back, and we want to talk about protests. I'm quite interested in protest and their effectiveness at the moment, and some surprising things that I've read recently about protest. So things about Brexit, things about protest, things about the economy, things about our lives, send it in. We'll speak next week.
Yep. See you then.
Yeah. Farewell.